Well, good afternoon, welcome back to the channel. My name is Jeroen and my passion is landscape astrophotography. And on this channel I share my astro adventures with you guys. But not today because there's a storm raging outside, so I thought I'd answer 10 of your questions. So let's dive right in. Well, and the first question comes from Paul Hayworth. And Paul also has a YouTube channel. It's called Nightscape Journals. Please check him out if you haven't already. He makes some great vlogs. And I'll have to look on my phone what his question was exactly. He asked, have you ever been scared whilst out taking pictures at night? And if so, what caused it? How do you deal with the fear that comes with all those strange nighttime noises? Well, to be honest, Paul, I am most of the time at least a bit nervous. All my senses get on overdrive when I'm out on my own, especially in the middle of nowhere. And yeah, what do I do about it? I just start photographing, and when time passes I get more and more relaxed because I know and I experience I am the only one here and the only thing here most of the time. I'll come back to that. And yeah, when I just start photographing, enjoying the night sky, I am totally fine with it. I have been pretty scared though one or two times, especially when I was suddenly face to face with a wild boar. And those animals can be pretty impressive, I can tell you, especially if they're standing there right in front of the path looking into your eyes. What are you going to do here? And yeah, the best thing to do is just try to stay calm, don't make any sudden moves, and yeah, I just choose another path. And yeah, again, when time passes, I start photographing again and enjoying the night sky, minding my own business, and the wild boar or boars also mind their own business, so everything is good. The next question is from Peter Yuma from Germany, and his question goes as follows. How do you keep your colors natural in editing? If I desaturate all, it looks flat, and otherwise it looks too hyped. Well, I think that's a really good question, and what I do mainly, I stretch my data, or I increase the contrast and clarity of my data in various steps. And before I do that, I want to make sure I start with a really good color balance I like. And I do that by cranking up the saturation to 100% and tweaking the color balance until I'm happy. There has to be a little bit of color of everything. And if I'm happy, I'll turn down the saturation again, and then it looks like a sort of good base point. And after that, I'll start to stretch one layer, and I end my stretching with a really good color balance again. So mainly if you stretch or increase your contrast, you see that you also increase the saturation. Most of the time I think it looks a bit too much, so I desaturate it a bit again, and I end every stretching round with a color balance and a saturation level I like again. And if I go further and further, I do more levels of stretching most of the time. I have to get a bit more selective with the color, so I'll have to selectively, for example, say I select blue and I have to change the hue or the saturation of the blue specifically until I'm happy again, and maybe I'll stretch a bit more, and in the end I think it looks good if the Milky Way has a bit of saturation, but I don't like it in the sky around it, so I'll work with layer masking in Photoshop to mask in some saturation in the Milky Way, or I desaturate the sky around it. So yeah, that's basically it. Just step by step, and end every step with a color balance you like, and I think if you follow that process, you'll come there. If you want to check out how it looks like in real life, I have made a full tutorial on how I process my Milky Way images right here. Another question about post-processing comes from Renee Virhouse, and his question is, I'll have to look it up again. Do you ever have difficulty blending foreground and sky? Well, most of the time the technology behind the sky replacement tool in Photoshop works pretty well to create a good sky mask so that I can blend my sky with my foreground. But there are two situations which are pretty tricky also for me. And the first is when there's an object sticking out into your sky from the horizon line, and the software mostly doesn't really recognize this as an object which belongs to your foreground. So I'll have to mask and paint that bit in of the mask again. Especially I can remember when I was making star trails at the old lighthouse. This one was really difficult, and I had a lot of manual drawing to do on that mask to make it a natural blend. And also my photographs from Korčula Island on Croatia, where I have shot maybe my best Milky Way photos ever. The blending was horrible. It was a nightmare, because if you're shooting out over the sea and there is some mist, there isn't a clearly defined horizon line, and the software just doesn't know how to handle it. So I had to do a lot of manual subtle changes using the brush over the mask, and until it looked natural. I think it came out pretty well, but it cost me some hours to make it a good blend. So do I ever have difficulty blending the sky and the foreground? Yes, I definitely have sometimes. Various people ask me what my dream locations for astrophotography would be. And of course, yeah, some of the cliche locations come up, like I'd love to go to La Palma, or the Atacama Desert, or Dead Vlei in Namibia. I'd love to photograph those dead trees in the desert underboard, or one skies with a Milky Way above it. Socotra with those alien looking trees, I would love to go there one day. I've seen some brilliant stuff, some brilliant photographs from Benjamin Barakat there. But actually my number one location I would love to shoot under a Milky Way is an abandoned building or object. You know, it doesn't have to be somewhere specific, as long as it is dark. I think, or an abandoned building, or maybe an old abandoned rusty car somewhere in the desert. Yeah, those stuff I think would look really good. I'm really jealous, for example, of Richard Tetty, what he finds, nightscape images on YouTube. He always seems to find an abandoned building somewhere in the desert in Australia, or an old rusty car, or pharmacy equipment. And what I'd love to do, what Richard also does by the way, is add some atmospheric light painting to those objects. And yeah, perhaps also a bit of colorful light painting, but I'll come back to that in the next question. And the next question comes from Andrew Allen, which is Scotland's Night Sky on YouTube. Check him out if you haven't already. He makes some great videos of astrophotography, mainly in Scotland, of course. And his question is, who is one photographer you'd love to spend a day with and learn from? And I'll have to look to my notes sometimes, because there are a lot of astrophotographers I'd love to spend a day with and learn from. A lot of guys, I think, would be just really fun to spend the night with. Maybe they can show me their local area. You, of course, Andrew, included. And also, of course, to learn your 360 technique. I would really love to do that sometime. But yeah, specifically also, if I look to specific skill sets of astrophotographers, I've come up with this little list, and the first which came up was Richard Tetty. Richard really does this great light painting. He calls it his fine art light painting technique, and I would really love to join him one day and to just learn all the skills he has. He has shown it, of course, in his videos on YouTube also, but I think it's different if you just join a workshop or something. Adrian Madoui, who is Night Lights Films. I'd love to pick his brain on all the knowledge he has of the Aurora Borealis and how to photograph it. Euros Fink from Slovenia. I think Euros, you can make a lot of money by making a post-processing tutorial, because the amount of detail and color you get out of your shots are insane, and I would love to pick your brain on that. John Rutter, of course, also has a YouTube channel. Check him out. He makes some really insane long focal length panorama and mosaic images of the Milky Way, and I think his results are stunning, so I'd love to learn that from him sometime. And besides that, I think he is a brilliant guy, you know. I always see him sitting in the desert on his chair with a beer, and just very relaxed, enjoying the sky, and then come up with such an amazing result also. So fascinating stuff. Of course, Alan Wallace. I mean, who wouldn't want to spend the day with him, right? Fortunately, the man has made this great book where he shares all his knowledge he has. Really check out that book. I think it's the best book on astrophotography there is right now. Besides those, I think most of you won't know this photographer, but he is one of my favorite photographers. Not an astrophotographer per se, but it is Troy Pava. Troy is an American light painting artist, he calls himself. He has made various books, for example, Night Vision, and yeah, there are. Yeah, he does a sort of light painting, which gives it a sort of ghostly, eerie feel. All the scenes, and sometimes he does it inside, sometimes also outside with a starry sky above it. Maybe you can see it here. I'll also put on some pictures of his website or his Instagram, and I'd love to just learn that colorful, ghostly technique on an abandoned building location with a Milky Way above it. That is really my dream photo. So Troy, if you're in for it sometime, let me know. Mark Wierda, who also joined us on an adventure some time ago, I'll put a link up here if I can. He asks, if you were to start all over again, what would you do differently? Well, Mark, to be honest, not that much, fortunately. Maybe there are two little things, and the first is I would look for some Astro buddies in an earlier stage than I did right now, because I started to really have fun in the hobby when I collected some like-minded people around me, so that I don't have to shoot alone in the dark most of the time, and just sharing the passion also with WhatsApp groups, which we call the Astro Bros, with RHO, of course, because Row Fuki, which we think is very funny. Well, it just makes it 2 times more fun. And the other thing which I might do differently is I would think a bit more about my camera system and lens system, because I just started with what I had, which was a Fuji system, which is filming me right now. That system does okay while filming, also sometimes while photographing still, but it's getting very old. So I've upgraded to a Canon system. I've also had that one getting Astro modified, but right now I'm looking to upgrade my video system. I would love to shoot with a Sony a7S series. That means if I would buy a Sony, I would have another lens system which isn't interchangeable with my photography setup. So yeah, it gets expensive fast. So if I would start all over again, I would just choose one system where I could buy all my lenses for and where I could make film and also photographs with. But besides that, yeah, I would just do everything the same. Just go out and start to shoot with what you have and work from there, and don't forget to enjoy the night sky. The next question comes from Slovenia, from a guy called Matej Mlakar. I hope I pronounce your name right this time. And his question is, do you like the direction where Astro edits are going in recent years? H-alpha, strong edits. And I think I know what you mean, mate. Yeah, anyway, yeah, I think it is really interesting. I come from a background also of deep sky imaging, where it is normal to get as much detail out as you can, and I have always been fascinated by the amount of detail you can get out of your data, which your camera sensor gets, what you get when you put in an H-alpha filter. If you collect, for example, 3 hours of data during summer solstice and still can get such a result as this, I think it is fascinating. On the other hand, I think it is also a bit addictive. I myself also have edited some shots in the past, I think, where I went a bit too far. For example, my first H-alpha shot, which I made at the lighthouse, if I look back now, I think, yeah, the H-alpha is much too strong to look natural. But yeah, I don't know, I think there is a little something in between. You know, I think everybody wants to get as much detail out of the Milky Way, for example, as they can. On the other hand, I also tend to like those more subdued and natural, I call it tranquil, edits also more and more. So yeah, it is a bit of an addiction maybe to get your post-processing further and further, and I always try to strike a balance between the two. On the one hand, the natural thing you see with your naked eye, and on the other hand, the super strong edits, as you call them. And yeah, also my taste, and I think everybody's taste also changes with time. What I like now might be totally different than what I would like a year from now. So yeah, I think it is interesting that the technique is there to get those edits stronger and stronger, and I think, yeah, how far you go is just a matter of taste, and I tend to think I am somewhere in the middle, but yeah, that's just subjective. Kimberly Jekyll on Instagram asked me, how do you process your foregrounds? And she specifically asked, do you make a long exposure for your foreground, or do you stack your results? Yeah, she means when I make a separate sky exposure and a separate foreground exposure and I blend them together. Well, I mainly come away with just doing a longer exposure for my foreground at a lower ISO setting to minimize the noise. So most of the time my foregrounds are made at about ISO 800, 2 to 4 minutes, and that just depends a little bit on how dark the location is. Yeah, I try to match the exposure, yeah, to get a sort of balanced look with my sky in the field. And if I blend them together later into Photoshop, I'll tweak it a bit so that it looks, yeah, as natural as possible. You could also do a stack of your foreground if you want to reduce your light pollution even more. But if you try that, make sure that there are no moving objects in your foreground. For example, trees which are blowing in the wind, because your stacking software won't know what to do with it and you'll have a hard time blending it together. But yeah, for me, mostly just a longer exposure will do just fine. I've got another question on Instagram from CD Photography, and she asked me, how do you know when to go out shooting? Well, if I think about it, there are just 4 things. The first is when the object I want to photograph is at the right position in the night sky, and I check stellarium for that most of the time. It has to be a clear night, of course, and there has to be no moon. And those are 3 instead of 4. Anyway, well, basically those 3 things. If you really want to go into detail about planning your shots, I recommend checking out this planning vlog I made about a year ago, where I really go into detail about weather forecasting, planning your location, knowing when somewhere is where in the night sky, etc, etc. So yeah, but basically just when the object is out, the skies are clear and there's no moon. Corné Ouwehand asked me, what would I prefer? Would I prefer a very dark location with strong winds, or a more light polluted location with a very calm atmosphere? Well, I've thought about it a bit, and of course it depends on, on the composition you are shooting also. But if the composition would be equal at both locations, I think I would prefer to shoot at a darker location with strong winds, because you can't battle light pollution, but you can battle winds. You can try to set up your tripod very low to the ground, try to block the wind by sitting in front of your camera, for example. And yeah, I think I can work better with strong winds than with light pollution. So I hoped I was able to clarify 10 of your questions. Thanks for the questions. I think those were great questions. If you have more questions, let me know down in the comments, and maybe I'll be able to make another video like this in the future, in between the real Astro adventures. Yeah, talking about real Astro adventures, I see the skies clearing up a bit. The storm has gone away, and maybe I should pack my bag and get out there. Thank you guys for watching, and see you on the next one. Bye bye.